Hey guys, Raquel here, and I'm going to cover some of the recent announcements that have been made on Battlefield's Instagram. So, if you've been browsing Reddit lately and going through the Battlefield subreddit, you may have noticed that there's been a couple posts posted there linking back to Battlefield's Instagram talking about both the available factions that will come out when the game is released and also the customization options that exist in the game. So the first one that I want to talk about is the factions that will be available on release. Now, none of this has been confirmed. This is all simply speculation, even though this did come from the official Battlefield account. Nothing's been made official yet. We'll have to wait until EA Play probably before this is all made official, before we actually know if this is solid truth. But I figured that I'd go ahead and make a video and talk about some of these things. So the first tweet says, at launch, you'll be able to choose from the British faction on the Allied side and the German faction on the Axis side. Through the tides of war, we will evolve the Axis and Allied factions. So this suggests that when the game is released, there will only be two factions. A lot of players seemed really concerned about this, especially considering that when we look at Battlefield 1, we had multiple factions at release. We had the British, we had the Germans, Austro-Hungarians, the Ottomans, and the Italians. 5 separate factions, all with different skins available at release, and these maps taking place in different parts of the world. So it's kind of surprising that with World War II, war that involved even more nations, I believe, than World War I did, with battles across the entire world, that we only have 2 factions available upon release. So this might seem a bit concerning upon first read, but I think that it will work, especially if the Tides of War system that they're coming out, this system of content releases, of seasons that DICE will be using to implement new content in the game. If this ends up working and if they do it well, I believe this is completely fine. So the first 2 factions will be British and German. And based off what we know from the war stories, the campaign mode, the single player mode in Battlefield 5, the battles that are taking place there are going to be in Rotterdam, France, Norway, and North Africa. Now, from what I know, Great Britain did not fight in Rotterdam, but I'm sure that they can introduce something there. Or maybe they'll include the Dutch faction in this and the single player campaign, but it just won't be transferred over to multiplayer. So I believe we'll be seeing battles in these locations. I believe we'll be seeing them elsewhere between these 2 factions as well. There will probably be multiple maps set in each of these locations, and they'll expand from there. I don't think this is great thing to be concerned about. I believe the main reason that they did this is that with only having 2 factions, they can introduce customization options for both factions exclusively, so they can focus a lot more on creating a wide range of different customizations that fit both of these armies. And I'll be talking a bit more about that in just a minute. But I don't think it's a reason to be concerned. Some players are concerned that they might only release 3 to 4 maps, such as what they've done in expansions in Battlefield 1, where you had the French, the Russians, I believe those are the main 2, that were introduced, as well as the Australians and everything. But with these factions being introduced, you only had 3 to 4 maps per expansion. I don't think that's going to be the same way with this game. I believe at release we'll have a solid 7 to 8 maps for the different play modes. With the grand operations, we might only have 1 or 2 maps, similar to what we had with Battlefield 1. And more maps will be released with the Tides of War, along with different factions. Now, the reason why this makes sense is that at the beginning of the war, it was relatively limited to a few different factions. Now, of course, you can go in and say, yes, Russia, the Soviet Union versus Finland, and Germany. You can include Poland in there. There's a whole swath of different countries. You can include the Norwegians, the Dutch, the Belgians, things like that, even the French. But I think it does make sense to just focus on these 2 factions. I don't think it's wildly absurd. I don't think there will be a lack of content at release, but we'll see. And we'll see more announcements with EA Play. But The other thing that I wanted to cover that is somewhat similar to this is that in another post on Instagram, the Battlefield Instagram said, in response to a question, do factions have certain customization options for them, kind of like Battlefront? So one of the big concerns in the community with the different customization options is that they'll be completely wild. And also I think a big concern is that they won't be faction specific. I know that's a big concern in the community that these factions will be able to pretty much equip whatever they want, which I never believed to be the case, and it seems like it isn't the case. On their Instagram feed, they said, yes, you're only able to equip your factions, helmets, and camos. At launch, your Axis soldiers can only have Axis helmet camos, and the allies only allies helmet camos. There will also be additional historical restrictions in Tides of War. So what I take this to mean is that at launch, we'll have two factions, the British and the Germans. Both of these will have their own respective helmets, camos, customization options, all that fun stuff. Those will be faction specific, they'll be Allied Axis specific. Now as the game expands, the reason why I think they added that last sentence there, the sentence that says there will also be additional historical restrictions in Tides of War, is that these factions, these countries, did share equipment and everything. So I think that when you see the Americans introduced to the war through this Tides of War series of content, I think there might be some sharing of customization options between the British and between the American forces. Now, where the restrictions might apply is when, say, Russia is introduced. There might not be some sharing there. There might not be any sharing at all between the different customization options because of the difference of equipment that was used. I'd say the same for the Axis faction as well. When Japan is introduced, I don't see there being a lot of similar customization options between the Japanese soldiers and the German soldiers. Now, all this is pretty speculative at this point, so we'll see what happens. And I'm really excited for EA Play coming up next week to be able to see more of the multiplayer, be able to see more of this game and what DICE and EA have in store for us. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.